Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Swaggart, for the introduction. Trust I have a message that all of you will enjoy as a learning experience. First off, may I ask a few questions to better understand all of you? One, how many of you have heard of the 8th Air Force in England in World War II? Secondly, how many of you have an interest in aviation? Third, how many of you know of the B-17 bomber, known as the Flying Fortress of World War II fame? Last, how many of you have ever seen a B-17 bomber in person? Thanks. My presentation will center around the mighty 8th Air Force, particularly the B-17 bomber, and how it contributed to help win the war in Europe in World War II. Now, I'm going to attempt to cover 3.5 years of my military life as a pilot flying the B-17 bomber in the minutes allowed. What can I best tell you to give you a good picture? The 8th Air Force was formed in 1942. Goal was to defeat Germany's great air force known as the Luftwaffe, a very strong air force under the guidance of Adolf Hitler. Hitler was threatening to invade or capture England. The English Channel and the North Sea separated the two powers. Hitler felt strongly, along with his number one Air Force General, Hermann Goering, that this could easily happen with the powerful German Luftwaffe bombing England into submission. Now, how many of you have ever studied or know the story of the Battle of Britain? Briefly, this huge battle of survival was the story of the Royal Air Force, known as the RAF, basically consisting of a fleet of very brave, determined fighter pilots flying the famous Spitfires and Hurricanes. These two aircraft were a match for the German aircraft. The odds of survival were totally against the RAF. They were outnumbered in the aerial battles. One major factor in their favor, and a big one, they were flying over their homeland. This meant if they were shot down and bailed out, they could get into another plane in short order and go up to fight again. Their bravery will always be remembered by the British people. They actually saved the British Isles. Winston Churchill was very complimentary of these pilots. The Germans finally gave up and stopped bombing the British Isles. Now, what would be the next move by Germany? The one big option was invasion by water. Who were the great powers at this time of history? One, Franklin D. Roosevelt with the United States of America, Winston Churchill, England, and Joseph Stalin for Russia. The United States made the decision to help Britain against the threatening invasion by Germany. Our Air Force was the best offer to accomplish this task. This is how the 8th Air Force was formed in England. In 1942, the U.S. started flying missions to bomb Germany. The 8th Air Force in daylight hours and the British at night. The U.S. bomber personnel losses were extremely heavy. The U.S. did not have the fighter planes to protect the bombers from the well-trained German fighter pilots. The words Flying Fortress described their B-17 well, but the Germans were winning aerial battles with their many and excellent pilots. Our losses were staggering. At this point, we had the B-24 bomber, known as the Liberator, along with the B-17, also an excellent plane. I flew the B-17, so this plane will be my emphasis. On a few long-range missions, we lost as many as 60 planes on one raid. Now, what was happening in my life about this time? I was a senior in high school in 1941, when Pearl Harbor was attacked by the Japanese on December 7, 1941. I knew then my goal was to be trained as a pilot in the U.S. Air Force. As a young boy on the farm, I would spend hours watching the beautiful cloud formations, wishing I could be up there jumping from one to another. To make a long story short, I was very fortunate to be accepted in the aviation cadet program after graduation. In 9 months of training, I would graduate as a pilot. I was truly lucky. My dream had become reality. My choice upon graduation was to fly bombers. I was assigned to fly the B-17 Flying Fortress, starting as a co-pilot. Now this is no Piper Cub. This plane has a wingspan of 104 feet, a fuselage 75 feet, flies at speeds up to 300 miles per hour, has four 1,200 horsepower engines, and it carries up to, listen to this, 2,100 gallons of gasoline, carries a crew of 10 people, has 13 50 caliber machine guns on board. I can't begin to describe the feeling of sitting down in this cockpit of this giant for the first time. Jumping to this from training planes was one big leap. This is when our flight crew was formed. 10 men who from this day forward would be a team to excel in our individual assignments on the aircraft. Those assignments were, and I'll point to it on a model plane that I have, if I may please. Okay. Those assignments were the pilot and the co-pilot, the navigator and the bombardier, the radio operator back in here, the tail gunner back here, two waist gunners over here, and underneath it there's another turret, and that's where the ball turret gunner were. 10 of us, as you can see. The plane was a flying fortress and well named. No one function was more important than another. We all had a task, and this was accomplished by teamwork. Now allow me to add the duties of our ground crew. The ground crew got the glory, or the air crew got the glory, but we would not have been flying very long without the dedicated ground crew. They kept our engines tuned to perfection, repaired all the holes in the plane after a mission. They filled our gas tanks. They cleaned the inside of the plane, usually a big mess from spent shell casings. They worked all night to have our planes ready the next morning. We were a team. Just a brief story as to how we got to England. And as a crew, we picked up a brand new B-17 at Kearney, Nebraska. This plane had been ferried there by the women pilots who ferried planes from factory to the air bases. Here we were given sealed orders as to our destination, possibly Africa, Pacific Ocean Theater, or England. We opened the letter in flight, and our destination was England. We left in the middle of the night as spies were counting and watching takeoffs. We landed in New Hampshire, refueled, slept over, and then on to Goose Bay, Labrador. We refueled there and then on to Iceland. Our final destination was to be Prestwick, Scotland. Now, to stop just a minute, can you possibly imagine what a thrill this was for a 20-year-old kid flying a bomber across the Atlantic Ocean? I could only think of history of Charles Lindbergh making this solo flight 17 years ago, my hero. Our excitement soon changed. We had been airborne about 5 hours when the navigator informed us he was sure we were off course. We were flying on instrument compass heading. This just can't be. We climbed above the cloud cover. We took some celestial readings with our sextant. Yes, we were headed about 20 degrees off course. Upon landing in Scotland later on, we found out what happened. We were now flying in a combat zone. The Germans had a submarine in the area that drew us off course. Goal was for us to miss England, run out of fuel, and crash in the North Sea. They now had also jammed our radio. Our navigator made some corrections and assured us we were now over the British Isles, but where? The radio operator frantically worked the telegraph, using Morse code, sending out Mayday messages for help. Mayday, as you may well know, is the international call for help. We were flying over a cloud cover, so didn't know what was below. We knew our gas supply was getting low, so decisions had to be made. We knew descending down into cloud cover was not smart, as our map indicated mountains in the area. The pilot and I were about to tell the 8 crew members they were free to parachute and take their chance. The pilot and I had pretty well agreed on we would stay with the plane and take our chances and ride it down. And lo and behold, on our right wing, suddenly an RAF fighter plane appeared. Remember, we are without an operating radio. Our radio operator checked in Morse code, with the fighter with the secret code for that day. By Addis lamp, the pilot answered and said, "Follow me." We did, with great pleasure, and landed on an RAF fighter base in northern Scotland, a base that housed wounded RAF pilots. They lived in pure luxury while recuperating. We were treated like as royalty, even having our shoes shined by the help. One crew member had to sleep on board the plane overnight. We needed to protect our aircraft. We were now in a combat zone. The next morning, we continued our trip to Prestwick. At Prestwick, we turned over our new plane over to the control people. We were now assigned to report to a base somewhere in mid-England. Now we will be ready to fly missions. This is why we're here. We were assigned to the 95th Heavy Bomb Group at Horsham, England. I will attempt to describe a mission as briefly as I can. An orderly would awaken us usually about 3 or 4 a.m. A truck would pick us up and we would get some breakfast about 5 a.m. These breakfasts were very somber. No one spoke to another. We knew we would probably never see our next-door friend again, as they would easily be dead or a POW in Germany by evening, if they survived at all. Then, on to the briefing by the commanding officer as to our target, what and where fighter planes would be to help us. Now it's time to get dressed. First, long johns, then our daily uniform, now a flight suit, then an electric flight suit, and our heavy sheepskin-lined leather jackets, pants, and boots. We always checked our personal items in a secure bag, and it was locked up. We then picked up our helmets, our goggles, our oxygen masks, and headed for our planes. The enlisted men would mount their machine guns. Remember, we had 13 50 caliber machine guns on board each plane. They would check their ammunition supply. We needed hundreds of rounds per gun. The bombardier would check the bomb load. The pilot and co-pilot checked the plane along with the crew chief. Now it's takeoff time. We start and warm up the engines and prepare to take off and head for the runway. We had all been assigned in number for our turn to take off and our position in the formation of 18 aircraft when airborne. We took off exactly 30 seconds apart and climbed to an assigned altitude. Almost always we had to climb through a heavy overcast on instruments. Now imagine hundreds of planes doing this all over England. Were there collisions? Yes. Many crews were killed over England. We are now ready to form up and head for Germany. At 10,000 feet, we all hook up our oxygen masks and turn them on. We plug in our heated flying suits. Now we start climbing. We know that we will be at 30,000 feet and it will be between 40 and 50 degrees below zero. I won't go into any detail as we encounter the enemy fighters except for one mission. The Germans were circling above our three groups, deciding who to attack. Usually the group flying the poorest formation would be their victim. This day it was the group just ahead of us. The German fighters came in out of the sun, attacked, and shot down 7 B-17s out of 18 planes in just seconds. Watching these on fire going down, were we scared? You bet we were. I counted 66 parachutes floating down. Some were colored. This meant they were German pilots shot down in the short battle. These missions lasted anywhere from 6 to 10 hours. Remember, nothing to eat or drink for 10 hours plus. We would return about 3 to 4 p.m., debrief, have dinner, and be thankful to be alive to fight another day. I ended up flying 33 missions and turned 21 years of age in England. Just a few comments covering some missions. As I mentioned earlier, we had no friends on the base. You never knew from day to day who would be shot down tomorrow. I had a fellow classmate from my cadet class arrive. We were both excited to see one another again. We both flew the mission the next day. Frankowski's plane was hit by artillery fire, started burning, and headed for the North Sea below us, crashing with 10 men aboard, all killed. On one trip to Paris to bomb an airfield, just on the outskirts of Paris, we encountered heavy artillery fire. And the plane hit our plane, excuse me. On one trip to bomb an airfield just on the outskirts of Paris, we encountered heavy artillery fire. I was flying wing on the lead ship. The lead plane took a direct hit, exploded with a full load of bombs and possibly about 1,500 gallons of gas on board. Just one huge ball of fire going down. We could feel the heat in the cockpit as we were 75 feet apart. Another mission of interest, our base received an urgent message that the Marc Maquis, they were the freedom fighters in France, they needed help. These people were civilians, hated the Germans occupying their homeland, and did everything in their power to blow up train tracks, locomotives, bridges, ammunition dumps, anything to stop the German army. They needed food, ammunition, and guns desperately. Our people responded by filling big 4-foot canisters with these supplies, replacing the normal bomb loads. And 18 planes secretly took off heading for southern France. They were hidden in a valley surrounded by a heavy wooden area. They had marked a small meadow for us to use as a drop zone. We dropped down to 300 feet, very low for heavy bombers, in formation, found the meadow, and dropped the canisters. Fortunately, the secret drop remained such, and we safely pulled up and headed back to England. A very tricky mission. We were all very nervous. We all made it. Some major cities, such as Berlin, were so heavily defended by artillery guns, it appeared you could walk on the flak all around us. We dreaded these missions, and this one in particular. One comment regarding our little friends. That's in quotes. The fighter pilots in their P-51s and P-47s, they were our friends. Without their protection, I would not be here today relating this story to you. Their problem was they could only carry enough gas to reach our distant targets and had little gas left to fight and get home. The Germans knew how much gas they had and waited to attack us when our friends had to leave and head home. Their purpose was to protect us and shoot down German fighters, and they did just that. I can't thank them enough. One final mission. On June 6, 1944, we invaded the European continent on the shores of France to stop the German war machine. This huge event will never be repeated in history again. The number of planes, possibly over 2,000, flying across the English Channel early in the morning, is a sight one can never forget. We also had about an equal number of ships of all sizes crossing the English Channel, ready to make a landing in France. The amount of air and sea power was just overwhelming. A very well-kept secret as to the day this would happen. This mission was named the longest day, and it truly was. I was fortunate to be a part of it, bombing bridges, railroad centers just beyond the beachhead to destroy their mobility for bringing supplies and help to stop the invasion. I could go on for hours, but living this experience cannot be repeated or forgotten. We live in one great country, the United States of America. Be proud of it. Thanks for listening.
Wonderful.